The global economy has taken a battering over the last 4 years. The pandemic, cost of living crisis, and war in Ukraine have all left their marks. How has all that shaken up the economic status quo in Europe? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Germany and France have traditionally been the driving forces of the European economy, but increasingly growth is coming from southern nations like Spain, Portugal and Greece. So, what's going so well for these sunshine states?
Months of negotiations in 2012 to bail out debt-laden Greece and save the Eurobloc. Fast forward a little over a decade, the Greek economy in the first quarter of this year is growing 3 times faster than Germany or France. It's a similar picture across southern European nations. They're outpacing the once powerhouses in the north. In Portugal, for instance, its Recovery and Resilience Plan aims to foster sustainable growth.
We are going to do it by anchoring ourselves in an even more productive and competitive economy and a renewed and efficient state.
But the biggest boost to these economies? Tourism. The return of tourists and their spending power has bounced back to pre-pandemic levels and beyond. Tourism now accounts for around 10% of the economies of Spain, Italy, Greece and Portugal, with international tourists flocking to these destinations. This does, however, increase prices, and Greeks have been protesting at the growing cost of living and wage stagnation.
It is really difficult, especially for those with low wages. They should get a Nobel Prize because you cannot live in Greece at the moment on the minimum wage.
Across Spain and Italy, local residents are concerned with the increase in visitors and the impact that's having on resources and inequality. But with growth stagnating in Germany and France, the drivers of Europe's economy, others will almost certainly have to pick up the slack.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Athens is Vicky Pryce. She is an international economist and former UK government advisor. She's also the author of Greekonomics, the Euro Crisis and Why Politicians Don't Get It. In London, we have Lorenzo Codogno. He is a visiting professor at the London School of Economics and chief economist at Lorenzo Codogno Macro Advisors. And here with me in the studio is Roger Gewolb. He is a principal at Strategic Advisory Solutions and a former advisor to the Bank of England. You're all very welcome. Vicky, we'll come to you first. Everyone will know you as one of the leading economists in Europe, but you're actually Greek and you're at home in Greece now at the moment. 12 years ago, this was a very different picture for your country, wasn't it? What has changed?
It certainly was, and that's why I wrote the book, because of course we were in the middle of the Euro crisis. Greece was getting a number of bailouts. It looked like it was the sick man of Europe. Everyone was saying that the solution to the Eurozone crisis was Greece leaving the Euro and the EU altogether. And they didn't do that. They stuck to it despite a referendum that actually said we don't really want any of that bailout and the conditions attached to it, but they did accept having it and they didn't leave the EU or the Euro. And here they are today, still with quite a high debt to GDP ratio, which is estimated 150% or thereabouts now, but a lot less than the near 200% they had a few years ago. Expected to go down to 148% or maybe even 145% next year, mainly because of growth in the economy. And indeed, Greece is growing faster than the EU on average and the Eurozone on average. And in fact, a year ago, it was one of the fastest, in fact, it was the fastest growing country in the EU. So yes, we've come a long way. There's no doubt about that.
Vicky, just give us a feeling of what people on the streets feel in Athens and other cities and towns across Greece. I mean, do they really feel they've turned a corner?
Yes, they do. Of course, lots of Greeks left, mainly young Greeks, during the Eurozone crisis, and many of them are across Europe right now or even further afield. But the unemployment situation is looking considerably better. I mean, there was a time when youth unemployment was over 50%. A lot more confidence right now. There is a considerable amount of new investment coming in, including in the tech sector. The Greeks are very well educated and loads of them are in the AI, IT area. And there are very many Greeks who've been educated in other countries who have returned, who have done economics sometimes, but also, of course, medicine. I think that we have some very, very strong representatives in that field. So it's looking better, and there have indeed been some big foreign companies that have come in, either bought Greek companies or have put money into the economy and hired quite a lot of people. So it is getting better. It's not perfect by any means. So we have to watch it. Tourism has been a very, very important part of the recovery. And also, of course, the EU has been sending quite a lot of the funding that is set aside for COVID and beyond, the new EU Generation Fund, to southern European countries, of which Greece has benefited quite considerably. It's still getting money, and it's likely to get more. It hasn't been exhausted yet. So yes, a lot more confidence around.
Lorenzo, your home country of Italy is very much on the move economically. Just give us your assessment of what the Italians have been doing right over the last couple of years.
Well, Italy is performing slightly better than core European countries, let's say. That is reassuring, given that Italy has effectively had no growth over the past 20 years on average. Yet you wonder whether this is really the result of deep structural reforms or simply a demand stimulus. I would argue for the latter, because effectively what has happened is that the EU funds plus very generous domestic incentives for construction activity, house renovation to make houses more energy efficient, which was actually a huge scheme, because that accounted for almost 10% of GDP in terms of public money spending over the past few years. That has clearly stimulated demand, but you wonder how much is due to supply, and I would argue that there is not much improvement on the supply side of the economy.
And Lorenzo, how much of this is down to someone like Giorgia Meloni? She's brought stability, she's quite a strong leader, she's gaining international respect.
Well, I think the current government doesn't have very clear objectives in terms of economic in terms of economic priorities. But having said that, it is certainly a positive that this government is a stable government and probably is likely to remain stable for a long while. So, in a sense, it has no excuse. If the economy is not performing, there is nobody else to blame but themselves. So I think that is a very convincing argument to do the right things.
Roger, I'll come to you. Do you worry that a lot of this is being driven by tourism and it's transactional and it will pass and it might just be an economic flash in the pan?
A bit, yes. I think, Enda, that it's real. I think it's solid. I think it's permanent. It's good to see. It's a shame that we don't have the pigs anymore, because Italy has dropped out. Although that pejorative term was not a good one, but I'd rather have the pejorative pigs and have Italy included in the...
So this is Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain,
Absolutely. Yeah? That's what we've been calling for some years, the pigs, like BRICS, you know, that acronym, but we can't, you know, it's now PRGS, you know. I think it was real and sustainable. It was driven by post-pandemic enthusiastic travel, but I think it was also driven by normal tourism of younger people who hadn't traveled before and all sorts of other very positive factors, and would continue and will continue but for the troubles in mainly Spain about the issues with tourists. I think basically, you know, the things that I hear there are two things, is that the protests in public streets and places have scared some tourists away. And then if you've got the owner of your own hotel telling you to naff off, you don't particularly want to go there. So they could really hurt themselves with that. But for those two factors, I think we're on a very sustainable upsurge, and it's wonderful to see.
In terms of tourism, because we've done shows on this, there's a lot of backlash now from locals against what they see as over-tourism in some of the Spanish islands.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a very difficult balance for the Spanish authorities?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I'm sorry, but there's nothing worse than bad British tourists. I mean, we are really horrible sometimes in places. And I wouldn't blame, what shall I say, refined European hospitality hosts from not putting up with some of the things that are imposed on them. And it's a balance. If you object too much, you don't get the business. You don't get the euros.
Very good point. Vicky, just come to you. Greece, famous for its hospitality, your pristine beaches, myriad of islands. It's idyllic in summer or any time of the year. How reliant is the Greek economy now on this tourism boost?
Oh, very considerably. So the fact that everyone started coming back after the restrictions were lifted post-COVID made a huge difference. And of course, the last thing you'd want is something happening again. And there is no doubt that there are concerns about all the geopolitics. I mean, we are in Greece in a strategic position, perhaps you'd call it. We have the Balkans and Ukraine and Russia right up to the north, and then, of course, Israel and Gaza to the east. So it is a very precarious environment in many ways. But apart from tourism, there's huge amount of shipping activity that goes on. The Greek ship owners are well known across the world. The port of Piraeus, which has been partly bought by the Chinese, has also flourished. A lot of trade going through, and a huge amount of renewable energy which can be produced and is produced in Greece. There are times when all the electricity that is used comes from renewables, a lot of wind at times, but the hydro could also be even more developed. And the links with the Balkans in particular are also improving considerably, so including infrastructure links. So you do have more than just tourism sustaining the economy, but there is no doubt that it's a very important factor in sustaining, and encouraging the growth that we have seen recently. But there's a lot more.
Lorenzo, when we talk about some of the southern areas of Italy that traditionally haven't done so well, tourism is now a big factor, isn't it? Places like Sicily, Sardinia, the Aeolian Islands, Puglia in particular. Tourism is very important for the Italians.
Well, certainly it is a positive factor in helping the economy, but we shouldn't overemphasize that, because for Italy, tourism accounts for about 13% of GDP. In Greece, it is twice as much. Italy is the second manufacturing country in Europe, and industry has not yet recovered from the slowdown after the rebound following the pandemic. So tourism is indeed important, but again, we should be cautious. It could even become a mixed blessing, because, or even some kind of curse in disguise, because what is producing is a reallocation of resources within the economy towards tourism, which is the least productive sector in the economy. So again, we need to be careful to kind of have a balanced growth rather than just a boost to tourism.
Roger, I want to come to you. You're from the United States. Everywhere I've traveled recently, I've been around a few countries the last few weeks in Europe, I'm hearing American accents. How important is the strong dollar? Is that playing into it, in terms of Americans feeling more comfortable financially coming to Europe?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that Vicky is right. There are other things besides tourism, but I mean, tourism is the driver in all of these countries, these southern European countries. They very much are. So the dollar, I mean, I think the thing about the dollar today is to watch whether the Saudi Arabia not renewing the petrodollar agreement, which has been in place since 1974, is going to change the dollar as the world's premier currency. I mean, there's a huge movement to switch to other currencies, and the dollar shouldn't have prominence. And people are being very vociferous about Saudi dumping the United States. I mean, in the 70s, the Saudis were under tremendous pressure to sign that petrodollar agreement, which basically says that they can only sell their oil in dollars, and the dollars that they get, they must invest in U.S. securities or U.S. equities. Now, why should they be held to that? I mean, if you were selling cheesecakes, I mean, why would you want to be told what to do with the proceeds? So I think the Saudis are quite right to say, sorry, we're not going to resign and bind ourselves to that. Absolutely right. It's just sound business. But I just think they're being good businessmen. There's nothing ominous about that. They're not going to crash the dollar. They can still sell oil for all the dollars they want. So personally, I think the dollar will hold up.
Vicky, I want to talk about disparity in GDP between the north and the south of Europe. So if we look at some stats, despite the economic progresses that southern European countries are making, there's still a wide disparity in GDP between the north and the south. So this chart, which we're looking at, shows just how big the economic divide is between Europe's core and peripheral countries. We can still see the Netherlands, France and Germany with higher GDP per capita, and Italy, Spain, Portugal, lower GDP per capita. Do you think that's quite a concern long term in terms of catching up?
It is. I think the expectation was that if you joined the euro, was going to help achieve greater equality across. Some of those differences wouldn't be there, mainly because with a single currency, you'd have to start paying people across various countries similar rates. Possibly prices would adjust and would be equal, so you would be able to sell something much more expensively in one place and a lot more cheaply in another. So that would force, in a way, this type of gap that existed to be bridged by natural osmosis. It didn't happen mainly because of the crisis that we had, the financial crisis, which of course affected quite a lot of countries disproportionately. And the real problem with the southern European countries that you mentioned is that they were the ones that had a great difficulty in reacting positively, if you like, to the financial crisis. They were the ones who couldn't, once they were in the euro, adjust their exchange rate downwards. They couldn't start spending lots in terms of deficit financing because, of course, that was no longer allowed. There was a Stability and Growth Pact. They were the ones that had to be bailed out or be helped by Draghi, who was running, of course, the European Commission at the time. I'm correct myself. The European Central Bank at the time, and did say quite clearly that he was doing everything he could to save the euro. That was mainly aimed at those countries that found it very difficult to borrow. Those were Spain, Italy, Greece, of course, Ireland, Malta, Cyprus. So what you found, therefore, is that they lost out quite considerably because the economic conditions were so bad during that period for them, disproportionately compared to others in the north. And they've taken a long time to recover. If you look indeed at Italy's GDP per head, it's still only just, I think, now where it was pre the financial crisis, but that's no real progress. And yes, it is a worry.
Lorenzo, just looking at Italy, your country ran a budget deficit of 7.2% of GDP last year. How much of a concern is that playing into everything economically in Bella Italia?
Well, I think it was particularly high for a very specific reason, which is the front loading from an accounting point of view of the subsidies for house renovation, which according to Eurostat, it had to be kind of front loaded because of the transferability of tax credits. So a very technical issue. But let's say it should improve significantly in 2024 and continue to improve in the coming years, but the improvement will be slow. So given that the high debt to GDP ratio, Italy can only hope to kind of reduce the debt to GDP ratio if can deliver sustainable growth over time. And that remains a question mark in my view.
Lorenzo, give us your assessment of Giorgia Meloni's performance then, leading your country and her economics. Just what's your assessment of her first kind of period in charge?
Well, I think from the public finance point of view, I think so far there has been discipline and prudence. In terms of economic policy, I think there seems to be no strong or no consistent view on what the economy needs. But as I pointed out at the beginning, the good point is that this government is pretty stable and has no chance to blame someone else for the poor performance of the economy. So they have no choice but to try to follow the recipes that have been on the table for quite a long while, which means structural reforms, reforms of a number of sectors in the economy by increasing competitiveness, with the ultimate goal of improving on productivity, because that is the key issue for the Italian economy, has been at the root of the poor performance in the economy for many years.
Roger, if we look at Northern Europe, you got the traditional big powerhouses of Germany and France. They're not doing so well. What's going on there in the north?
I think there are two different situations. I mean, Germany has got employment, has got all sorts of unique issues. I think a lot of it was brought on by Angela Merkel's immigration, bringing in a lot of people that they really weren't able to handle, and they're now feeling the effects of that. France is a different kettle of fish, because German politicians don't have Marine Le Pen's at their throat for many years and then finally succeed. I think France is very unique. It's like Americans call me up and say, "How's the weather in Europe?" And I have to explain that the weather's different.
It's changing everywhere.
Well, everywhere is different. There is no European weather, for goodness sake.
Exactly.
So how's the weather in America?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So I think you have to look at the economies differently in each case. But I mean, as for the subject of today, I've really been thrilled of late by the growth in Southern Europe, which, I mean, I particularly love Sicily. And, it's such a wonderful place, but there could be so much more.
Yeah.
And I'm just glad to see it picking up. And Vicky, Greece, of course, as well. We don't have anybody Spanish here today, but they're going through their problems as well, of course.
Vicky, are you concerned about Germany not doing so well? I mean, big traditional powerhouse. Europe needs a strong Germany and a French economy as well.
There's no doubt that Europe does need a strong Germany and France. Now, in Germany, of course, it's true that there hasn't been very much infrastructure investment. I think it didn't do an awful lot over the last decade or so, mainly because it relied on its success that it was already having. So cheap gas from Russia, easy exports to China. Well, all these things have disappeared, and it's left Germany with a headache much bigger than many other countries. And that's a real issue. Not that the rest of Europe wasn't also relying quite a lot on Russian gas, but Germany in particular had moved away from nuclear, coal, or at least it was intending to, and it finally did from nuclear. It's moving away from coal, and it didn't have any LNG facilities either, so it couldn't even switch easily from Russian gas to getting stuff from the States sent over to it. It's now moved in that direction, and it has had to really rethink its industrial strategy, because of course its high energy intensive sectors have to be brought back to thinking of different ways in which they could continue producing. So energy demand's gone down, and some of those sectors have suffered. But I do think it will recover. I think it has the ability to rethink its position, and for Europe, frankly, working more closely together is the answer. So not looking at France and Germany as two distinct and fighting. And you see a little bit of fighting now in terms of what to do with Chinese electric vehicles, for example. So they don't all agree what to do about Ukraine. They don't all agree. So there are differences, but certainly the strength will come from working more closely together rather than being apart. Whether that will be achieved in the short term, I don't know, but there's no doubt that in the long term, that will have to be what happens.
Lorenzo, final question to you. Is this growth we're seeing in Southern Europe sustainable?
Well, I think it is not, because as I tried to argue before, it is mostly supported by stimulus to demand. And that by definition tends to abate over time, especially given the stimulus provided by EU money, which probably will continue for another couple of years, because the program, as you know, expires 2026. But you wonder what will be left in terms of potential growth after that. Some improvement is probably coming out of this kind of massive investment program, but I doubt that Italy and other countries will actually deliver on the structural improvement that would be necessary to really make sustainable this kind of improvement that we've seen.
Lorenzo and Vicky and Roger, thank you all so much for your expert analysis. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.